In the heart of Chicago, David Harper, a 41-year-old millionaire CEO, lives surrounded by wealth, but consumed by grief. For 8 years, he believed his daughter died in a fire that also took his wife. Until one quiet afternoon at an orphanage changes everything. As David visits for a charity event, a little girl's voice singing a familiar lullaby stops him cold. He follows the sound and freezes. The girl, Sophie, bears the same birthmark as his lost daughter. Could it be? Shaken, he investigates. A DNA test, sleepless nights, and a truth more painful than he imagined. Sophie survived the fire, but no one told him. She spent years in orphanages, thinking her father never wanted her. Now, David must face his guilt and rebuild what time nearly destroyed. But Sophie, scarred by fear and silence, doesn't trust easily. Will she accept him? Can love still grow from heartbreak? With the help of a pink-painted bedroom, bedtime lullabies, and patient storytelling, David slowly earns her trust. But just as hope glimmers, the world starts watching. Can he protect their fragile bond from media scrutiny? One silver paintbrush becomes their symbol of healing. Subscribe to see this heartfelt journey of love, redemption, and a second chance at fatherhood unfold. Rain tapped against the windows of the Harper estate, a quiet rhythm that echoed through halls too vast for one man's footsteps. David Harper, 41, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his study, staring out at the manicured garden he never walked. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt, haunted, hollow, untouched by the billions his company had made. 8 years. That was how long it had been since the fire. The police said it was instant. His wife, Elise, and their 5-year-old daughter, Lily, were trapped inside their summer cottage when faulty wiring turned their haven into ash. Only one body was recovered, Elise's. Lily had vanished in the smoke, and with her, David's purpose. Since then, he lived in silence, except for the memories. Every evening, he returned to this house of marble and glass, never truly present. He stopped going to the beach, canceled holidays, and worked like a man trying to outrun grief. Only Elisa's old piano remained untouched in the living room, the last sound of her hands echoing in the air. That morning, his assistant, Gloria, knocked gently. "David, the press is waiting for you at the orphanage." He nodded. Another charity event, another photo op, another chance to distract himself from the ache that no amount of power could ease. The orphanage sat on the edge of South Chicago, a modest brick building with peeling paint and a tired gate. As David stepped inside, children scampered past with crayons and paper planes. A volunteer led him through the main corridor, showing him a new art room his foundation had funded. "Would you like to meet some of the kids?" the volunteer asked. David smiled politely, but his gaze wandered. Then he heard it. A soft melody floated through the hallway. High, delicate, familiar. A lullaby. Not just any lullaby, but the one Elise used to sing to Lily every night. His chest tightened. He followed the sound without thinking, turning the corner to a small reading room filled with hand-me-down books and blankets. There, on a beanbag in the corner, sat a girl. She had chestnut hair tied in 2 uneven braids and wore a pink sweater with a faded bunny print. Her voice was clear, full of innocence. "Sophie," a caretaker whispered, stepping beside David. "She sings that almost every night." David stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the moment would vanish. The girl looked up. Her eyes, wide, familiar, blue like Elise's, met his. She stopped singing. Then he saw it. On her left hand, just below the thumb, a small, star-shaped birthmark. The exact mark Lily was born with. The mark Elise once called her guiding star. David knelt. "Hi there," he said softly. The girl tilted her head. "Are you here to adopt?" His voice cracked. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she replied, then pointed to a crayon drawing beside her. It was a picture of a house on fire, with a tiny girl standing alone beside it. She'd drawn herself. David's vision blurred. He reached for her hand gently. "Do you remember anything from when you were really little?" Sophie shrugged. "Only smoke, and someone calling my name. I used to have a bunny, but it burned." He broke. Tears streamed down his face. For the first time in 8 years, they weren't for the past. They were for the miracle sitting in front of him. "I think I knew your mommy," he whispered, "and I think I might be your dad." Sophie blinked. "Are you crying?" He nodded. "Why?" "Because I lost someone a long time ago," he whispered, "and I think I just found her again." Sophie reached out, wiping a tear from his cheek. "It's okay. I'm not lost. I live here." David laughed softly, broken and whole all at once. He stood and turned to the caretaker. "I want a DNA test. Immediately. And while we wait, I'll fund everything. Better beds, more books, and I'll be back. Every day." He looked back at Sophie. Her small hand now clutched his tie, holding on gently. "Do you like to draw?" he asked. She smiled. "Only houses that don't burn." David Harper returned the next morning, earlier than expected, wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. The orphanage director blinked twice when she saw him walk in with a tote bag in hand. "I thought you had meetings today," she said gently. "I rescheduled," David replied. "Some things matter more." He stepped into the common room. Children giggled near a worn-down couch, coloring pages spread out like leaves. Sophie sat by the window again, her braids a little neater today, a pink crayon clutched in one hand. She was drawing another house. This one had smoke curling from the roof. She looked up as David approached. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would," he smiled. "I brought something." He pulled a small book from the bag. It was a picture book Elise used to read to Lily, a story about a bunny who found its way home. Sophie took it carefully, her fingers tracing the soft cover. "I like bunnies," she murmured. "I remember," David said before catching himself. He sat beside her, careful not to push too close. "Do you like to read?" "I used to," she said, "but sometimes the stories make me sad." David nodded. "That's okay. Sad stories can still have happy endings." Sophie turned the page, her lips moving silently. Outside the window, clouds drifted over the Chicago skyline, casting shadows over the cracked pavement. Inside, time slowed. After a while, she looked up. "Why are you being nice to me?" David hesitated. The truth sat heavy on his tongue. "Because I think you're very special," he said, "and maybe because I lost someone once, someone who looked a lot like you." Sophie stared at him. "Was it your daughter?" His breath caught. "Yes." She blinked, then asked softly, "Did she die?" "I thought she did," he whispered, "but now I'm not so sure." Sophie set the book down. "People don't come back when they die. My friend said that once." David looked at her carefully. "What if someone just got lost?" Sophie didn't answer, but she picked up her drawing and added a sun in the corner. A tiny, gold sun. Something new. Later that day, David sat across from the orphanage's director in her cramped office. A ceiling fan whirred overhead, rattling slightly with every turn. "I need a DNA test," he said firmly, "and I'll cover every cost." The director leaned forward. "You really think she's your daughter?" David nodded. "She has the same birthmark, same lullaby, same eyes, and—" "My heart knew before my head did." She softened. "It'll take a few days. And David, if this turns out to be true, are you ready for what comes next?" "I wasn't ready to lose her," he said, "but I'm ready to find her." By the time he left that afternoon, he had already arranged for Sophie to get new clothes, a proper mattress, and an easel for painting. "Every kid deserves their own corner of the world," he said to the staff, "even if it starts with just a brush and some colors." That evening, Sophie sat cross-legged in her room, painting with her new set. Her fingers were smudged with blue and green. On the paper was a pink house with a small window and a man standing beside it. The man wore a gray sweater. She'd drawn him taller than the trees. "Who's that?" a volunteer asked gently. Sophie answered without looking up. "He said, I'm not lost anymore." Across town, David stood alone in the hallway of his mansion, staring at an old photo. Elise holding Lily, mid-laugh, the breeze lifting their hair. He touched the glass. "I think I found her, Elise," he whispered, "and this time, I won't let go." In a quiet drawer, he placed the picture Sophie drew that day. The house, the tall man, and the bright sun, a symbol of something beginning again. The third morning, David arrived just as the orphanage gates creaked open. The autumn wind was brisk, carrying the scent of leaves and something unspoken, something old returning to life. He didn't walk in like a CEO today. No driver, no assistant, no schedule, just a man holding on to the edge of a miracle. Inside, Sophie sat cross-legged on the hallway floor, drawing with chalk. Her small fingers moved quickly, sketching a house, a tree, and two stick figures holding hands. David paused, watching her from a distance. She looked up and smiled. "I drew us." He swallowed hard. "That's beautiful, Sophie. Can I keep it?" She shrugged. "It's chalk. It'll go away when they clean the floor." David knelt beside her. "Then I'll take a picture," he said, snapping a photo with his phone. "That way, it won't disappear." She stared at him a moment. "Are you rich?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because you smell like my old social worker. Fancy soap," she said, wrinkling her nose. "And you bring lots of stuff." David laughed softly. "I guess I am. But it doesn't mean I'm better. Just means I can help." Sophie didn't respond. She stood, brushing dust from her pants. Then she reached for his hand. "Want to come to see my secret place?" They walked through the narrow corridor into a dusty old library room. The ceiling tiles sagged, and the shelves leaned like tired shoulders. But in the corner, beneath a cracked window, was a blanket fort made from old sheets and cardboard. "This is where I go when the dreams get loud," she said, "when I feel too small." David crouched to fit under the blankets. "Can I sit with you?" Sophie nodded. He looked around. Crayon drawings were taped to the inside walls. Fire, smoke, crying stick figures, but also suns, butterflies, and stars. One stood out, a drawing of a woman with brown hair holding a small girl. "That's my mom," Sophie whispered. David's voice was barely a breath. "She was beautiful." Sophie leaned close. "Do you think she's in the stars now?" David blinked away the blur in his eyes. "Yes, and I think she's watching you, every day." Silence hung between them, soft but full. Then Sophie turned her hand upward, palm open. "My friend said I was cursed 'cause of this." David froze. On her left hand, just below the thumb, was a small, pale, star-shaped birthmark. He felt his breath catch. Slowly, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a tiny photo, creased, worn, but still clear. Lily, age 5, in a red dress holding up her hand to show the same birthmark. Elise had called it their lucky star. David's hand trembled as he placed the photo beside Sophie's. She tilted her head. "That's me," she said. "No," David whispered. "That's Lily, my daughter." She studied the photo again, then looked up. "Are you saying I'm her?" David's voice cracked. "I think you might be." She stared at him, eyes wide. "But I don't remember you." "That's okay," he said, reaching for her hand. "I remember you, and I never stopped." Outside, wind rustled the trees. Inside, beneath that fragile fort, something shifted. A lost thread tied itself back to a name. Later that day, David sat in his car outside the orphanage. He couldn't drive. He just stared at the chalk photo on his phone. The house, the tree, the two figures holding hands. He called his lawyer. "I want full access to her records, all of it. Birth documents, placement history, everything." The lawyer hesitated. David, if this is what you think it is, it's going to get complicated. I don't care. Start with the fire report. Pull the coroner's files. Someone misidentified my child. Back inside, Sophie sat with the photo he left behind. She touched the image of her 5-year-old self and whispered, "Lucky star." For the first time, it didn't feel cursed. It felt like home. The following day, sunlight poured through the orphanage windows, casting golden slants across the tiled floor. David walked in quietly, holding a plush bunny in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Inside was Elisa's old scarf, rose-colored with faint perfume still clinging to its threads. He didn't know why he brought it. Maybe because it still smelled like home. Sophie was sitting alone near the toy shelf, her knees hugged to her chest. When she saw David, she didn't smile like before. Her eyes studied his face with something deeper, something careful. He crouched beside her. "Hey, I brought you something." She looked at the bunny first. "It's soft." "It was Lily's favorite," he said softly. "Would you like to keep it?" She nodded, then reached for it slowly, as if unsure if she was allowed. David pulled the scarf out next. "This was your mom's. She wore it the day we brought you home from the hospital." Sophie held it up to her cheek. "It smells like flowers." "It always did," he whispered. She wrapped the scarf around her shoulders and sat with the bunny in her lap. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then she asked, "If I'm your daughter, why didn't you come sooner?" David's throat tightened. He didn't expect that question, at least not this early. He looked into her eyes, the same shape as Elisa's. "I thought you were gone," he said, voice cracking. "They told me you didn't make it. I wanted to die that day." Sophie blinked. "But I was here." "I know," he whispered, "and that's what hurts the most. I should have known. I should have looked harder." She picked at the frayed edge of the scarf. "Other people came to visit, but no one stayed." David's heart broke all over again. He reached for her hand. "I'm staying, Sophie. I don't care how long it takes. I'm not going anywhere." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Even if I don't remember you?" He smiled, tears in his eyes. "Even if you never do." A long silence followed. Then, suddenly she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Her hug was small but fierce, like she was testing if he would disappear. David held her tightly. He buried his face in her hair and let the moment wrap around him like forgiveness. A staff member entered quietly and paused in the doorway, then stepped back out without a word. Later that afternoon, David met with the orphanage director again. Her brow furrowed as she handed him a folder. "We pulled records from the fire 8 years ago. There's something strange." David opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents, intake forms, transfer slips, notes from a state worker named Carla Dorsey. A post-it was stuck to one page. "Possible mis-ID during emergency intake. No follow-up. Kid was moved counties twice." He stared at the note. "There was confusion after the fire," the director explained. "A girl was pulled from the scene, unconscious, no ID. They assumed she belonged to the Johnson family from across the street." David read the name again. Sophie Johnson. But their daughter survived, and this girl never matched their photos. He stood up abruptly. "So, my daughter was alive this whole time, misfiled, passed through the system like a number." The director nodded, guilt on her face. "It happens more often than we want to admit." David pressed his hands to his face, trying to keep steady. "I want this fixed. Legally. Immediately." "She's already registered under that name. Then we'll correct it," David interrupted. "Her name is Lily Harper, and she's coming home." Back in the playroom, Sophie showed her drawing to another child. A house with a wide front porch and 2 figures sitting on the steps. "This is me," she said. "And I think he's my dad." She pointed to the tall figure in the drawing. He was holding a plush bunny in one hand and a scarf in the other. A pink sun rose in the sky behind them. The boy beside her asked, "Does your dad really wear scarves?" Sophie smiled. "Only when they smell like someone you miss." David sat in the orphanage director's office, clutching a clipboard with trembling hands. The DNA test had been ordered. The swabs were sent. Now came the wait. "How long until we know for sure?" he asked, his voice rough with anticipation. 3 to 5 days, the director replied gently. "We've put a rush on it." David nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and slid over a check. "This is for renovations. New mattresses, heaters, art supplies, whatever they need. No child here should feel forgotten again." The director glanced at the amount, her eyes widening. "David, this is just the beginning," he interrupted softly. That afternoon, he returned to the playroom with a bag full of books and markers. Sophie looked up from a puzzle, her face cautious but brighter than the day before. "I brought you something," he said, holding out a sketch pad. She opened it carefully. "It smells new." "Because it is," he smiled. "I figured you might like a space that's all yours." She touched the first page, then whispered, "Can I draw my mom?" "Of course," he said. "And I'll tell you stories about her if you'd like." They sat cross-legged on the floor, and David told her how Elise once painted a mural of stars on Lily's nursery wall. "She said the stars would protect you," he said, his voice catching, "even when we couldn't." Sophie looked up. "Did they?" He reached over and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. "They did. You're here." Each day after that, he came back. Sometimes with a science kit, sometimes with coloring books, always with a soft voice and undivided attention. He never pushed, never rushed, just sat with her, listened, and slowly earned back time. One afternoon, he found her alone in the art room, painting a single tree beneath a night sky full of stars. "Look," she said proudly, "I made it for you." David studied the painting. The tree had 2 names carved into the trunk, Sophie and David, with a heart in between. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the dark canvas. His throat tightened. "It's beautiful," she beamed. "It's our lucky tree." That night, David returned to his mansion, a house that had never felt emptier. He wandered through its pristine halls, stopping in what had once been Lily's nursery. Everything had been packed away, covered in white sheets like ghosts of a life he'd shut away. He pulled one off. The mural Elise painted was still there, faded but intact. Tiny stars across a navy ceiling, and in the center, a golden one with Lily's name. The next morning, David called the orphanage. "I want her room ready," he said. "I'm not waiting for the test to love her." They set up a soft pink bed with cloud pillows. He had painters refresh the stars Elise once made, adding Sophie's name to the golden one. A team arrived to set up an easel and a full art corner in the room. Everything about it said one word: home. Back at the orphanage, a lawyer arrived with forms for David to sign, giving him temporary guardianship for visitation. But behind closed doors, the director warned him. "There might be resistance, red tape, people asking why you're only showing up now." "I don't care," David said. "Let them ask." Outside, Sophie waited on the steps, holding the bunny he gave her and a bag of art supplies. "You came back again," she said, a little smile peeking through. "I told you," he said as he knelt. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached into her pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. On it, she'd drawn 2 stick figures standing in front of a house with stars on the roof. "This is us," she whispered. "Can I bring it when I visit your house?" David took the drawing gently. "You're not visiting, Sophie. You're coming home." The office was dim, lit only by a single desk lamp. David sat with the detective Raymond Shaw, files spread out between them like pieces of a lost puzzle. Sophie had been home with him for 2 days now, and he couldn't sleep. He needed answers. Raymond tapped the fire report. The Johnsons lived across the street. They had a daughter about the same age. When rescue teams arrived, there was chaos. One child was found unconscious outside, no ID, no parent in sight. David stared at the page. They just assumed she was the Johnsons' kid. Shaw nodded, but the Johnsons later confirmed their daughter was at a neighbor's when the fire broke out. Still, the child was placed under their last name in the system, and the paperwork stuck. David closed his eyes. And nobody noticed the mix-up for 8 years? Shaw's voice softened. She bounced between counties, foster care placements. When no one claimed her, she just became a file. David clenched his jaw. Her name is Lily Elise Harper, my daughter, not a file. That afternoon, back at the mansion, Sophie wandered the hallway, barefoot in her bunny pajamas, the stuffed bunny under one arm. She stopped at the end of the corridor, where a door was slightly ajar. Inside was David's private office, dark wood shelves, books, and a large framed photo of Elise holding baby Lily. Sophie stepped closer, staring at it. David found her moments later. "She looks like me," Sophie whispered. "She is you," David said gently. "That was the day you came home from the hospital." She turned toward him. "Why did I leave?" He knelt beside her. "There was a fire, sweetheart. It happened fast. I thought I lost you and your mom, and I broke after that." "Did she die?" "Yes," he said, tears forming. "She saved you." Sophie looked down. "Then why didn't anyone come get me?" David's breath caught. "Because someone made a terrible mistake, and I didn't know. I should have looked harder." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded drawing. It was the mural from her new room, the one he repainted. Stars in a navy sky, a single golden one with her name inside. "This one means I came back," she whispered, tapping the gold star. David hugged her close. "Yes, you did." The next morning, a call came. David picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Harper," the voice on the line said. "The DNA test results are in." He stood in silence, the air thick. "It's a match. Sophie is your biological daughter." David's legs nearly gave out. He sank into the nearest chair, clutching the phone to his ear. "Thank you." He raced upstairs. Sophie was in the playroom, coloring quietly. When she saw him, she tilted her head. "You look like you ran up the stairs." He chuckled through tears. "I did. I have news." She blinked. "What kind of news?" He held out his hand. "The very best kind." She took it. He pulled her close. "You're mine," he whispered into her hair. "You were always mine." Sophie's arms wrapped around his neck. "Even when I didn't remember?" "Especially then." Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Sophie painted outside on the patio. David sat beside her, watching in silence. She dipped her brush in gold and painted a tiny star on his hand. "What's that?" he asked. "A promise," she said. "So you never forget again." David stared at the star. It shimmered in the light, soft and bright. A symbol, not of loss this time, but of return, of hope, of a father reclaiming what grief tried to steal. He whispered, "I won't forget, not ever again." The sun had barely risen when David stood in the hallway outside Sophie's room. Through the slightly open door, he could hear quiet humming, a familiar tune. Inside, Sophie sat cross-legged on the bed, the pink covers bunched around her, painting in her new sketch pad. A golden star gleamed on the paper, surrounded by swirling strokes of lavender and blue. In the middle of the star, she had written one word, "Mine." David knocked gently. Sophie looked up. "You woke up early." He stepped in. "Couldn't sleep. What are you painting?" She held up the page. "It's the star from my room. I wanted to keep one with me in case I ever leave." David's heart clenched. "You're not leaving, sweetheart. This is your home." She nodded slowly, but her eyes said she didn't quite believe it yet. Later that morning, the official letter arrived, signed, sealed, confirming the DNA results and naming David Harper as Sophie's biological father. He held the paper like it was made of glass. He read it again and again, as if willing it to undo the 8 years they'd lost. Gloria, his longtime assistant, entered with coffee. Her voice softened. "You okay?" He looked up, eyes full. "She's mine. It's official." Gloria smiled. "She always was." That afternoon, David and Sophie sat in his office. The fireplace glowed faintly. On the table between them was a framed photo of Elise and baby Lily, now joined by a fresh picture David had taken just yesterday. Sophie beaming on the mansion steps, paint on her cheeks. Sophie traced the edge of the frame. "Did she like pink too?" David nodded. "She did. Not as much as you, though." "Did she sing a lot?" "Every night," he said, smiling. "She used to sing you to sleep." Sophie leaned into his side. Quiet. Then, "What happens now?" David wrapped an arm around her. "Now, we start over. Together." But even as he said it, a thought gnawed at him, how much healing they had yet to do. That evening, Sophie stood frozen at the entrance of the dining room. A long oak table stretched across the room, far too big for two people. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A butler stood at the side, awaiting instructions. She looked small in the doorway, gripping her bunny tight. David knelt beside her. "Too much?" She nodded, eyes wide. He smiled gently. "Then how about pancakes on the patio instead?" She gave a small grin. "With syrup?" "Double syrup," he promised. They sat outside under the fading sky, birds chirping in the trees above. Sophie stacked her pancakes into a tower. David poured syrup in the shape of a heart. She pointed at it. "You made art." He chuckled. "You're rubbing off on me." That night, after she'd gone to bed, David stood by the mural in her room, Elise's original stars, now restored and glowing softly under the nightlight. Sophie had added new ones with glow-in-the-dark paint, forming a constellation of her own. In the center, she'd placed a small sticker, a gold heart. He stared at it for a long time. Then his phone buzzed. "David," the voice on the other end said, "I know you're not looking for trouble, but we've hit a snag." "What kind of snag?" "The Johnsons, the family Sophie was mistakenly placed under years ago. They're suing, claiming emotional distress even though they admitted she wasn't their child." David's jaw tightened. "They want money?" "They want relevance," the lawyer said, "and they're stirring up doubt in the media." David exhaled. "Let them talk. I'll protect her." He walked back to Sophie's bedside. She stirred in her sleep, clutching her bunny close. Her fingers rested on her sketch pad, still open to the page with the golden star. David whispered, "They can challenge me, but no one's taking you from me again." He kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and left the door cracked open, just enough so she'd know he was always close. The golden star on her paper glowed faintly in the dark, a quiet vow sealed in color and love. The rain tapped softly against the window as David sat alone in his study, a half-finished painting of Sophie and Elise in his lap. He stared at the brush in his hand, frozen between strokes. The colors were vibrant, but something in his chest felt heavy, unfinished. He looked up at the old bookshelf, eyes landing on a dusty leather journal, Elise's. He hadn't opened it in years. He reached for it, slowly flipping through the pages. Her handwriting danced across the paper, full of love and hope. Then he found a note written just days before the fire. "If anything happens to me, promise her she's never alone. Even if you think you've lost her, don't stop looking." David's throat tightened. He closed the book and buried his face in his hands. Meanwhile, upstairs, Sophie was curled in bed, clutching her bunny. The thunder outside made her flinch. The house, so large and still unfamiliar, echoed every creak and sigh. She slipped out of bed, bare feet pattering down the stairs. She found David in the study, the journal still open beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. David looked up, startled. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" "I had a bad dream," she murmured. The fire came back. He stood quickly and opened his arms. She walked into them without hesitation, hugging him tighter than ever before. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner," he whispered, voice thick. I let myself believe what they told me and I stopped fighting. That's on me." Sophie pulled back just enough to look at him. "But you're here now." "I am," he said, "and I'm never letting go again." The next morning, David sat in the kitchen as Sophie ate breakfast, painting with syrup on her plate. She looked more relaxed today, humming softly to herself. He watched her quietly, then asked, "Do you want to talk to someone?" She paused, eyes uncertain. "Not me," he said gently. "Someone who can help you with the nightmares, with everything." Sophie set her fork down. "Will it make the bad pictures go away?" "It might help," he nodded. "And you won't have to go through it alone." She thought for a long moment. Then, "Can I bring my bunny?" "Of course," he smiled. "He goes wherever you go." Later that week, they visited a child therapist who welcomed them warmly. Sophie was hesitant at first, but clutched her bunny tight and answered questions with soft honesty. Outside in the waiting area, David sat wringing his hands. A part of him feared Sophie would say she didn't want to stay, that she didn't feel safe, but when the session ended, she came out smiling. "She asked me to draw my family," Sophie said, "so I drew you." David blinked. "You did?" She held up a picture, crayons scribbled across paper, showing a tall man holding a little girl's hand under a night sky full of stars. "And I gave you a cape," she added proudly, "because you saved me." That night, David hung the picture above his desk. He sat in the quiet, staring at it for a long while, before reaching again for Elisa's journal. He read her final page, where she'd written, "She'll need your strength, but also your softness. Be both. That's how she'll know it's really you." David looked at the drawing again, at the cape she gave him, and whispered, "I'll be both, I swear." Upstairs, Sophie drifted to sleep with the golden star still glowing on her wall. The nightmares didn't come that night. Instead, she dreamed of a treehouse under a starry sky, and a father who never stopped looking for her, even when he didn't know where to start. The morning sun lit up the mansion's east wing, spilling warm light across Sophie's freshly painted room. Pink walls shimmered with faint stars David had stenciled by hand, just like Elise once had. Her name, Sophie Lily Harper, sparkled in silver across the door. It was hers now, truly. Downstairs, David stood at the kitchen counter, packing a lunchbox. He carefully added a sandwich cut into stars, a tiny note that read, "You are loved," and a pack of colored pencils. His fingers trembled slightly as he closed it. Today was Sophie's first day at her new school. When she came down, dressed in a soft blue dress and new sneakers, she clutched her bunny to her chest. "You ready, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching beside her. She nodded slowly. "Will they like me?" "They'll love you," he smiled. "Just be you. That's more than enough." Sophie hesitated, then slipped the bunny into her backpack. "He wants to come, but I told him he has to stay and guard the stars." David laughed softly. "That's a big job." On the drive over, Sophie stared out the window, quiet. When they pulled up to the school, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded drawing. It was of her new room, with a tiny stick figure version of David standing under the painted stars. "Can I keep this in my desk?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "Anytime you feel nervous, just look at it and remember, home is waiting." At pickup that afternoon, David waited anxiously by the gates. When Sophie emerged with paint on her fingers and a shy smile, he exhaled. "Look what I made, Dad," she beamed, holding up a painting. The word "Dad" hit him like sunlight after a storm. The painting showed two stick figures holding hands under a pink sky. Above them, a house with a golden star on the roof. David knelt. "It's beautiful." She hugged him tightly. "They let me hang it in the classroom." That evening, Sophie danced barefoot through the hallway, humming her mother's lullaby. David watched from the staircase, awe washing over him. For the first time in 8 years, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt alive. He joined her in the playroom, where canvases were already piling up. "Should we start clearing space for an art gallery?" he teased. Sophie grinned. "Only if you hang mine next to Mom's." "I will," he said, front and center. Later that night, David stood at Elise's old piano. He hadn't touched it since the fire, but tonight he lifted the lid and began playing, clumsily, searching for the lullaby. Sophie peeked in, listening. Then she joined him on the bench, placing her tiny hand over his. "Wrong key," she whispered. He chuckled. "You're the boss." They played together, off-beat, out of rhythm, but it didn't matter. They were finding their melody again. But just as the moment settled, David's phone buzzed. He read the message, jaw tightening. The lawsuit from the Johnsons had escalated. They now claimed guardianship rights, citing Sophie's long registration under their name and emotional distress. David stared at the screen. "They're trying to take her back." He stepped outside, pacing in the garden under moonlight. Rage and fear twisted inside him. How could anyone try to rip her away after all they'd lost? Gloria called. "We'll fight this, David. Every step. I've already scheduled a legal team." He nodded into the phone, voice low. "Tell them I won't lose her again. Not to paperwork, not to pride." Back inside, Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with a paintbrush still in hand. David lifted her gently and carried her upstairs. As he tucked her in, she stirred. "Are you sad?" "No," he whispered, brushing hair from her face. "Just thinking." "About what?" He paused. "About how I'll protect you, no matter what." She yawned. "Even if they try to take me?" He kissed her forehead. "Especially then." And just before her eyes closed, she whispered, "You can keep my picture, if you get scared." Thunder cracked over the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows across the marble floors of the Harper mansion. Sophie jolted upright in bed, eyes wide with fear. Her pink walls, once comforting, seemed to shrink around her. Flames danced in her memory, sharp, loud, unstoppable. She screamed. David rushed in, breathless, hair tousled from sleep. He dropped to his knees beside her bed, arms outstretched. "I'm here. You're safe. It's okay," he said, voice calm but shaken. Sophie trembled. "I saw it again. The fire. It came back." David pulled her into his arms. "It's not real. Not anymore." But to Sophie, it was. That night, she refused to sleep alone. David moved a cot into her room, refusing to leave her side. In the days that followed, her anxiety spiked. She flinched at sudden noises, refused to go upstairs alone. She asked questions he couldn't easily answer. "What if you disappear like Mommy?" David paused every time. "I won't. I promise." But promises, she'd learned, didn't stop people from vanishing. To help ease her fears, David brought home an old record player, Elise's. He placed it in Sophie's room and played soft jazz at bedtime, just like Elise used to. One night, Sophie whispered, "It smells like her." David nodded. "She used to light lavender candles. Want me to get one?" She nodded again, eyes wide with memory. They sat together in silence as the music played, the scent of lavender curling into the air. At school, Sophie struggled to focus. Her teacher called one afternoon to say Sophie had locked herself in the supply closet after a fire drill. She was shaking, the teacher said the alarm was too loud. David held the phone to his chest, eyes closed. Guilt bloomed again, hot, relentless. That night, David sat Sophie down at the kitchen table. "I talked to your teacher today." Her eyes filled. "I didn't mean to hide." "I know," he said gently, "and you're not in trouble." He pulled out a paintbrush. "Do you want to show me how the alarm made you feel?" Sophie blinked, confused. "With paint?" "Yeah," he said. "Let's put it somewhere it can't scare us anymore." She hesitated, then took the brush. On a sheet of canvas she painted jagged red lines, bold black streaks. And finally, in the corner, a tiny golden star. David asked, "What's that?" "That's where I hid," she said. "And that's you, coming to get me." He felt his throat tighten. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Later, he hung the painting in his office. "This one," he told Gloria, "is our courage. but the mansion still felt too big at night, too quiet. So David had an idea. The next weekend, he and Sophie visited a treehouse builder. Sophie chose the colors, sky blue and soft cream. She designed stars for the ceiling and insisted on a ladder, not stairs. "Ladders are for adventures," she said proudly. 2 weeks later, it stood in the backyard, nestled in a tall oak tree. Inside was a beanbag, books, and battery-powered lanterns that flickered like fireflies. That night, David found Sophie curled in the treehouse, fast asleep beneath a blanket, her bunny beside her. He didn't wake her. He sat outside looking up at the branches swaying in the breeze, the house glowing softly behind them. Gloria called. "The Johnsons aren't backing down. They want a court date." David exhaled. "Then we'll give them one." "She's had enough trauma," Gloria added. "We can't let them pull her into this." David's voice was steady. "They won't. I'll carry the fight so she doesn't have to." As he hung up, Sophie's soft voice drifted down. "Daddy?" He looked up. "Yes, love? Will the stars stay if I fall asleep?" He smiled. "They'll shine all night." She curled deeper into her blanket, mumbling, "Good, I trust them." And for the first time since bringing her home, David realized she was beginning to trust him too. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the lake, David and Sophie sat side by side in the art room, paintbrushes in hand. The walls were dotted with their creations: bright suns, blue houses, stick figures laughing. Sophie called them happy colors. One night, David showed her an old photo of Elise, taken at their honeymoon cabin in Wisconsin. "That's Mommy?" Sophie whispered, tracing the edges. David nodded. "She used to paint, just like you." Sophie studied the photo. "She looks kind, like the stories." She was. "And she would have loved to see you paint," he said gently. "She always said our daughter would have magic in her hands." Sophie blushed, then pulled out a fresh canvas. "Can I paint her?" "Of course." Her small hands moved with care. First a heart, then a woman with long brown hair, holding a little girl beneath a tree with gold leaves. "Is that you?" David asked. Sophie smiled. "It's all of us." That night, he sang her the lullaby again, a little off-key but full of warmth. As he tucked her in, she clutched the bunny and whispered, "I think she hears us." David kissed her forehead. "I believe that too." But as the bond deepened, pressure outside the mansion walls mounted. A tabloid cover screamed, "Millionaire CEO's orphan surprise, real or PR move." David threw the paper aside, jaw tight. "I didn't bring her home for headlines," he told Gloria over the phone. "I brought her home because she's mine." Gloria warned, "The Johnsons have filed for temporary custody, citing emotional confusion and routine disruption. They want visitation." David's voice dropped. "After 8 years, they want visitation?" "She's not ready," Gloria said. "They're not family." David agreed, but the law didn't move with emotion. He knew he had to show the court that this wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a father reclaiming his daughter, rebuilding their life. So he leaned into the moments that mattered. The next morning, while Sophie worked on a painting of the treehouse, David sat beside her. "What's this one called?" he asked. Sophie tapped her brush on her chin. "Safe again." He smiled. "That's a perfect title." She added 2 tiny stars in the corner. "One's you, one's Mommy." David stared, his eyes misting. "Thank you for letting me be your star." That weekend, they visited Elise's grave. Sophie held a bouquet of wildflowers and her drawing. She stood silently, then gently placed the picture by the stone. "She'll like it, right?" she asked. David wrapped an arm around her. "She'd be proud of you. Every day." Back at the mansion, they framed the drawing and hung it above the fireplace. Sophie insisted it go right in the center. "Now she's watching us," she said, content. Later, as David tucked her in, she whispered, "I'm not scared of the house anymore." He paused. "No?" "No," she said, "because I know where the stars are now." David turned off the light, letting the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling come alive. "They'll always be here," he whispered, "just like me." That night, Sophie didn't wake from any nightmares. She slept soundly, under stars, wrapped in trust, and David sat outside her room for hours, hand resting on a worn photo of Elise, heart full, and finally, healing. The morning paper arrived with a thud. On the front page, beneath a bold headline, was a photo of David holding Sophie's hand outside the courthouse. From ashes to empire, CEO's long-lost daughter sparks public debate. David stood by the window, reading in silence. Gloria sat across the room, flipping through legal papers. "They're digging now," she said. "Old footage, fire reports, asking why it took you 8 years to find her." "I was told she was gone," David said quietly. "I buried an empty casket." "They don't care. They want a scandal," she replied. "And the Johnsons are using this to push their petition again." Sophie ran into the room, clutching a canvas. "Daddy, look, I finished it." He turned, his face softening instantly. "Let me see." She held up a painting of 3 stick figures, him, her, and Elise, beneath a golden sun with wide beams. One figure held a paintbrush, the other held a heart. "It's called We Belong," she beamed. David knelt beside her. "It's perfect." But as she walked away, humming her lullaby, his heart sank. The media noise wasn't fading. It was growing. That evening, they sat together in the garden, under string lights. Sophie rested her head on his shoulder. "Why are the cameras always there now?" she asked softly. "Because they're curious," David said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "They don't know what love looks like, so they stare." "Does love make people mad?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied, "but it also makes them brave." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I wrote something." He unfolded it. It was a poem, written in crooked handwriting. "Once I was a maybe. Now I'm something true. I used to be a question. Now I'm me and you." David blinked back tears. "That's beautiful, Sophie." "It's for the people. If they want to know what love looks like." He hugged her tightly. "Then let's show them." The next day, the story aired on national news. A reporter asked outside the mansion, "Mr. Harper, why didn't you know your daughter survived? Don't you think a man with your resources could have found her sooner?" David stepped forward, holding Sophie's hand. "I lost my wife and daughter in the same breath. I was told my child didn't survive. I grieved. I tried to live again. And when I found her, I didn't ask for the world to believe me. I asked her to." He turned to Sophie. "And she did." Reporters shouted more questions, but Sophie squeezed his hand and whispered, "Let's go home." They walked away, the golden sun hitting their backs. Inside, the house was quiet, safe. That night, as David tucked Sophie in, she handed him the poem again. "Can we put this in a frame?" she asked. "We'll hang it above the fireplace," he promised, "next to your painting." She smiled. "So, people will know?" He nodded. "They'll know." Later, in the dim light of his study, David looked over news clips, online comments, and cruel speculations. But then his eyes landed on the poem, folded, faded at the edges. That little note had more truth than anything printed about them. In that moment, David realized the media storm couldn't touch what was real. Not the paint-streaked fingers, not the lullabies, not the whispered "Daddy" in the middle of the night. That was the story worth telling, and together they would tell it, with every stroke of Sophie's brush and every beat of their healing hearts. The auditorium was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Parents held children on their laps. Volunteers in matching T-shirts handed out flyers. At the podium, David stood in a charcoal suit, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled. Sophie sat beside him, holding a paintbrush in her lap like a microphone. A large canvas stood behind them. Sophie's painting, sunlight, a family, a path, hung front and center. David cleared his throat. 8 years ago, he began, I lost my wife in a house fire. I was told our daughter didn't make it either. I mourned her. I built a life around the silence she left. Sophie looked up at him, eyes wide. And just weeks ago, I heard a child singing. A lullaby no one else could have known. My wife's voice echoed through Sophie, and suddenly, hope returned. He paused, holding the podium. The system failed her, failed us. Sophie spent years believing no one wanted her, while I mourned a lie. But we are not here today to assign blame. We are here to build. Cameras clicked. People leaned forward. There are over 100,000 children in the U.S. waiting to be adopted, he continued, holding up a printed report. Too many grow up feeling invisible, forgotten, unloved. He placed the paper down, reached for Sophie's hand. That ends today. I'm establishing the Sophie Grace Foundation. Its goal is simple: fund trauma-informed care, support families through adoption, and train orphanage staff in emotional development. A collective murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. This isn't just about one child found, David said, voice steady. It's about the thousands still waiting, children with names, with drawings, with dreams. Sophie stood, holding up her painting. This one's for the kids who feel alone, so they know someone's looking. David smiled. Afterward, they sat on the edge of the stage. Gloria handed David a folder. You're already getting requests, features, podcasts, morning shows. I don't want attention, he replied. I want change. Gloria nodded. Still, the exposure might help fund it. David looked to Sophie. We'll do it on our terms, with truth and heart. That night, back at the mansion, Sophie taped her painting on the kitchen fridge next to her newest one, a butterfly escaping a cage. She looked up. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart? Will the other kids get a room like mine? Better, he said. They'll get homes and people who sing to them. She nodded. Can I teach them to paint? David knelt beside her. You already are. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside was a charm bracelet. One silver charm, a star. For you, he whispered, so you always know where you belong. Sophie's eyes lit up. Like the one on my hand. Yes, he said softly. The one that brought you back to me. She hugged him tight, the bracelet clinking softly as she whispered, We're not lost anymore, are we? No, David whispered. We're home. And in that moment, under the soft kitchen light, with crayons scattered on the marble counter and the scent of warm cookies in the air, the storm outside didn't matter. What mattered was this: a man, a girl, and a bond forged not by chance, but by love reclaimed. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation and gentle music. Light spilled through the tall windows of the Chicago Art Center, casting golden reflections on the polished floor. At the far end of the room stood a long white wall, covered edge to edge with children's paintings, bright, messy, full of life. David adjusted his tie and scanned the room. His heart beat faster than any boardroom meeting ever had. This moment wasn't about stock prices or market trends, it was about healing. Sophie stood beside him, wearing a pink dress that shimmered under the lights. She gripped her favorite paintbrush in one hand, the charm bracelet in the other. On her wrist, the silver star sparkled. A gallery assistant whispered, They're ready. David took a deep breath and stepped forward, Sophie at his side. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said, voice warm. This exhibit marks the first public event for the Sophie Grace Foundation. What you see on these walls, every brushstroke, every splash of color, was created by children currently in foster care. He paused, letting the crowd absorb the meaning. These aren't just paintings, he continued. They're pieces of childhood once lost, now reclaimed. A hush fell over the room. Sophie tugged his sleeve. Can I say something? David nodded, stepping aside. She walked up to the mic, her voice small but steady. My name is Sophie, she said. I used to be scared to dream. I thought dreams were for other kids, but then someone found me. She turned to David. And now I paint to help others feel less invisible. She held up a small canvas. On it, a girl stood in a field of stars, each one glowing with light. "I call this one home," she said softly, "because I have one now." The audience erupted in quiet applause. A few wiped away tears. As the evening wore on, guests browsed the paintings. Many offered donations. Some signed up to volunteer. One couple approached David. "We're ready to adopt," the man said. "We didn't know where to start before tonight." David smiled, shaking their hands. Then tonight was worth everything. Later, after the crowd had thinned, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, her dress wrinkled, her feet bare. David joined her, loosening his collar. "Did I do okay?" she asked. "You did more than okay," he said. "You gave hope." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" he asked. "My next idea," she said. "I want to teach painting at the orphanage every Saturday. Maybe some of the kids will find their own stars." David's throat tightened. "I think that's the best idea you've ever had." As they sat there, surrounded by children's artwork and the hum of cleanup, David looked at his daughter, not the girl he lost, but the girl he found. He realized something then, and the fire had taken so much, but love. Love had waited, and it had returned in the form of paint-splattered hands and whispered lullabies. Outside, snow began to fall softly, coating the city in quiet white. Inside, a little girl leaned against her father and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." David closed his eyes. Neither was he. And under the gallery lights where once there was grief, now there was color, bright, fearless, and forever.